Today, there are almost 4,500 people living in the little town of Del Mar. We have houses, apartments, hotels, restaurants, and shops. We have banks, a gas station, parks, and even our own post office. But a long time ago, there weren't any buildings here. Thousands of years ago, the first people to live in the area were known as the Sandigitos. They likely came here to enjoy the same beautiful beaches and pleasant weather that we do in Del Mar today. Many years later, but still a very long time ago, a group known as the La Jollans lived here. Although the La Jollans were not hunters like the Sandigitos, they did gather food like shellfish from the ocean. They also gathered seeds and used tools such as metates to grind their acorns into paste. Another group from the south moved into the area and mixed with the La Jollans. The Diegueños were referred to by different names depending on which side of the Los Penasquitos lagoon they lived on. The tribe living north of the lagoon was called the Ipai, and the tribe living south of the lagoon was called the Kumeyaay. In the mid-1700s, the Spanish came to San Diego and built missions. They also converted Indians to Catholicism and used them to build more missions north of San Diego. The Spanish took over the land and resettled many of the Kumeyaay on farms to grow food to support the missions along the Southern California coast. After the war between Spain and Mexico in the early 1800s, the missions were closed as the Spanish gave control of the area to Mexicans. Many people came from the east to California at the end of the Civil War, and even more when the railroad was constructed in the 1880s. Americans started living in the area, but Del Mar was still very different than it is today. For one thing, Del Mar was called Township 14. Some people even called the area Weed after a local rancher, Mr. William S. Weed.
In 1880, a New Yorker named Theodore Loop came to Southern California to build a railroad connecting Los Angeles and San Diego. The original train tracks were laid right down in the middle of Township 14.
Oh, that's Del Mar!
Mr. Loop liked the area so much, he told people that he had found the most attractive place on the entire coast, and he built a house near the mouth of Los Penasquitos Lagoon. In 1883, Loop and his wife Ella met a very successful rancher, Mr. Jacob Shell Taylor, who had moved here from New Mexico. Taylor and Loop decided to work together and build a new resort town. You guessed it, Del Mar. Taylor had the whole community mapped out. The town would be 1/2 mile wide and 2 miles long. It would be built along both sides of the railroad track. Taylor gave all the east-west streets numbers 1 through 22 and named the north-south streets Ocean, Grand, Railroad, and Highland. Grand is now what we call Camino del Mar, and Railroad became Stratford Court. Before the new town could really take off, they needed a better name. Loop's wife Ella suggested a name from a popular poem of the time called The Fight of Paseo del Mar.
Wild swept the wind of the ocean, rolling the fog from afar, when near him a mule bell came tinkling, midway on the Paso del Mar.
So, in 1885, the town was officially named Del Mar.
In Spanish, Del Mar means
Of the sea.
Taylor's big plans for Del Mar included building homes for people to live in, a school for children, and a hotel for visiting tourists. He was convinced that once people came to see his beautiful little beach town, they would want to stay, and Taylor intended to build and sell them houses to make a living. Many of the first homes were built on 9th and 10th Street, making it the center of town. Taylor built as many as 40 small houses, a 2-story Victorian schoolhouse, an observation tower, a train depot, and a water system. Before long, there was a butcher shop, a bakery, a post office, all the makings of a real town. By 1886, Jacob Taylor opened the first hotel in Del Mar at the center of town on 10th Street. He called it Casa Del Mar. Casa Del Mar was a fancy hotel. It had a music room, a smoking room. They even served ostrich egg omelets for breakfast.
Ostrich egg omelets? Ew!
To entertain visitors, Taylor built a dance pavilion on the beach at the foot of 11th Street. He also built a large swimming pool that went out into the ocean called a natatorium.
Fun fact!
The natatorium was the only bathing pool on the Pacific coast built into the surf. Above the pool was a platform so people could watch the swimmers from above. It had a 4-foot concrete wall at the end of it shaped like a ship's bow. So the water could come in, but the stingrays stayed out. You can still see remains of the natatorium at low tide.
Taylor worked hard for 5 years to make Del Mar beautiful. He planted cypress and eucalyptus trees and fresh flowers along the streets. Sadly, in 1889, the economy was starting to slow down and the California land boom was beginning to fade. In that same year, there was a big storm. It rained so hard that the roads were washed out and farm animals drowned. The steps down to the beach were ruined, and so were the railroad tracks. It became very hard to get in or out of Del Mar. The town was isolated. Three weeks after the flood, another disaster hit. One night, Jacob Taylor woke up to the smell of smoke in his hotel room. He quickly woke all of the hotel guests. The fire was so big that within 2 hours, the entire hotel burned to the ground. Taylor insisted that he would rebuild a hotel, but unfortunately, he never finished it. He moved to Texas and left behind the town he founded, never to return. For almost 15 years after the fire and departure of Jacob Taylor, Del Mar was quiet. Many people left Del Mar and moved just a little east to the outback to make a living farming. That farm country is now called Carmel Valley. Taylor's sister Lucille tried her hardest to maintain the town. She was able to rent some of the cottages in summer, but as time wore on, the town started to look run down. By 1900, Del Mar had nearly become a ghost town. Lucille wasn't ready to give up on Del Mar and continued to run advertisements in the San Diego Union newspaper. Perhaps one of these ads is what caught the attention of the South Coast Land Company. They bought all the vacant land north of 9th Street and began a new era in the development of Del Mar.
Like Taylor, the directors of the South Coast Land Company had big plans for Del Mar. The first step was to build the Grand Resort Hotel. They would call it the Stratford Inn. The South Coast Land Company decided they would build their new hotel on 15th Street, next to Del Mar's greatest asset, the beach. Once again, Del Mar was alive with construction. On March 9th, 1909, the beautiful Stratford Inn opened for business. It was a world-class hotel built on 10 acres. It had a saltwater swimming pool called the Plunge. Next to the Plunge, they built a powerhouse to provide power and warm water to the hotel and to the village.
Fun fact!
A room for the weekend only cost $4. What can you get for $4 today?
Shortly after the hotel was finished, a pier and a new train depot were built. The train depot was directly in front of the hotel, making it easy for guests to visit. The hotel guests came from all over. The majority of them traveled by train, but there were some wealthy guests that had automobiles and traveled on dirt roads to stay at the inn. Del Mar had many visitors, but it was also a growing community. You might be wondering, where did the kids go to school and what did they do for fun? Fortunately, the one-room school Jacob Taylor built was still around. In the early 1900s, there were only 11 kids in the whole school. There were certainly no computers or even books. Kids didn't even have to wear shoes to school. Four of the top 5 officials of the South Coast Land Company built homes and moved their families to Del Mar. Colonel Ed Fletcher was one of the first to build in the north part of Del Mar. He built a 2-story house on Avenida Primavera and Luneta. He also built the first house on the beach. The original beach house is not there anymore, but the Luneta house still exists. William Kirchhoff hired the same architect who designed the Stratford Inn to design his house, also on Luneta. The architect's name is John S. Austin, and he built many other houses in Del Mar using a similar style called California Craftsman. Henry Keller's house is probably the most notable and popular of all the houses built during this era. The Keller house is known as the Rock House, even though it is really made of bricks. The fourth partner in this firm, Charles A. Canfield, built a mansion on Avenida Primavera. In 1923, it was sold to Gilbert Solomon Wright, who was often called the father of Los Angeles. The house called the Canfield Wright House is still an important home in Del Mar. Another important house in Del Mar is the Edelweiss House on 10th Street. Many different people have owned this old house over the years, and it was once a post office, a general store, and a very popular ice cream parlor. Just when things were going so well, Del Mar suffered another weather disaster. Heavy rains and floods in the winter of 1916 washed out roads and bridges, isolating Del Mar. School was closed for almost 2 weeks. A few years after the floods, there was another disaster in Del Mar. In 1920, the very popular Plunge burned down. A new pool was built in its place.
The rest of the early 1920s were fairly uneventful. It was a simple time that kids mostly played on the beach, rode horses, and swam in the pool. In 1921, a new elementary school was built on Camino del Mar between 10th and 11th Streets. The school had 2 classrooms to accommodate the 36 students. Today, the building is used by the city government.
During the 20s and 30s, Del Mar experienced a lot of growth. Although there were still just a few hundred permanent residents, the summer crowds reached almost 2,000. To accommodate the growing economy, the Cockritz building was built across the street from the hotel. It had a drugstore, a soda fountain, and apartments upstairs. This building still exists today and still looks very much the same. 2 other significant structures were built in the late 20s, the Snakewall property and the castle. The Snakewall property was built by a man named Mr. Burnett who owned a cement business. The entire house was constructed with cement, and that included a really long wall surrounding the entire 23-acre property.
That's more than 23 football fields.
But wait, why is the house called the Snakewall property?
Fun fact!
Back then, there was a rumor that Mr. Burnett's daughter, Valentine, was deathly afraid of snakes. So her father built the wall around the property so no snakes could get near his daughter. Was that true? Nah, just a rumor.
The other unique house is the castle. It has numerous pools, fountains, terraces, and servants' quarters. The doors on the castle were shipped all the way from Spain to make it look like a real castle. Not everyone was living in a castle, though. During the early 30s, the country was experiencing a depression. Community leaders were looking to boost Del Mar's economy and saw an opportunity with the county fair. The San Diego County Fair had been held in many different cities and was looking for a permanent home. In 1936, they found it, Del Mar. There were tents and games and animals, and it only cost 10 cents to get it. The summer after the first fair, another very popular attraction opened in Del Mar, the horse races. Take a look at your mom or dad's license plate. Does it have a holder that says where the turf meets the surf? Do you know why it says that? One of the track's founders, Bing Crosby, was a very famous singer and actor. He wrote a song about Del Mar on the track, which he sang every day before the races. And even today, the song is still played before the first race.
Fun fact!
Only a year after the racetrack opened, a very famous race took place. You've probably heard of a certain horse named Seabiscuit. Well, on August 12, 1938, there was a race between Ligorati and Seabiscuit, and the prize was $25,000. No one thought Seabiscuit had a chance, but he won and even set a record for the fastest time.
Like the fair, the track brought people and money to Del Mar. A bonus was that it attracted movie stars from Hollywood, which was good for publicity.
When it first opened, the Del Mar racetrack was the biggest show in town. For the residents of Del Mar and surrounding areas, the racetrack was a 2-for-1 deal. All of the excitement of the horse races, plus the chance to rub elbows with some of Hollywood's biggest stars. In addition to Bing Crosby, another big star of time, Pat O'Brien, was a track regular. Pat O'Brien worked with Bing Crosby and others to open the track in Del Mar. Bing became the president and Pat became vice president of the Track Association. Another big star of the time, Jimmy Durante, discovered the charms of Del Mar. Mr. Durante enjoyed the town and the track so much he came to Del Mar every summer for 30 years. Jimmy Durante was so highly respected that the citizens of Del Mar named the street between the track and town after him. In 1963, Mr. Durante served as an honorary mayor of Del Mar for a day. Have you ever heard of a TV show called I Love Lucy? You may have seen some reruns on cable TV. Even before they had the popular TV show, Lucy and Desi Arnaz made Del Mar their summer getaway. They owned racehorses and loved going to the track. Another Hollywood couple to frequent the racetrack was Betty Grable and her husband, Harry James. Betty Grable was a very popular film star and lived part-time in Del Mar for 2 decades. She was so taken with Del Mar that she was suspended twice by a Hollywood studio for refusing to work during the Del Mar race season. Perhaps the most famous Hollywood couple to visit Del Mar was Ronald and Nancy Reagan. Before he was governor of California and the 40th president of the United States, he and his wife were both actors in Hollywood. They bred racehorses and were often seen at the racetrack. There are many other famous faces at Del Mar's racetrack. W.C. Fields, Mickey Rooney, Dorothy Lamour, and Glenn Ford. Jane Mansfield, Milton Berle, Eliza Minnelli, Dick Van Patten, Tim Conway, and Mel Brooks. Hollywood stars have enjoyed the racetrack in Del Mar as much as anyone over the years.
During World War II, the races came to a halt so that the buildings could be used as a bomber tail assembly plant. Many of Del Mar's facilities were used by the troops. How many of you knew that Del Mar had its very own airport? It was right near the water. The Navy could patrol the coast using a blimp and fly their aircrafts in and out of the area easily. After the war ended in 1945, the town went back to its everyday routine and the track reopened. The racetrack was and still is a very important treasure to Del Mar.
Fun fact!
In order to get people to start coming back to the fair after the war, an official greeter was hired. Tom Hernandez, a Spanish actor, was hired to play the part of Don Diego, and he was there to greet fairgoers every summer for 37 years.
The permanent population was growing, and the village of Del Mar was finally becoming a settled community. By the late 1940s, there were 158 students attending school and over 3,000 people calling Del Mar their home. With all the homes and businesses being built in Del Mar and people buying cars to travel around, there was a lot of road construction going on. For over 150 years, there had only been one major road in and out of Del Mar. It has been called Grand Street, U.S. Highway 101, and now we call it Camino Del Mar. With the track, a fair, and beautiful beaches luring people into Del Mar, traffic quickly became a problem. The state of California proposed to build a major highway that would pass right through Del Mar. That's good, right?
Wrong!
They literally wanted to build it right through the center of town. It would have had 8 lanes and wiped out all the businesses on the east side of the street. The Del Mar residents put up a good fight to have the new highway moved just east of their town. After 10 long years, the residents finally won. The construction of the new highway meant the Del Mar Airport would have to go, but the compromise was worth it.
As the town grew, Del Mar residents wanted independence. They didn't want to be controlled by the much bigger San Diego government. They felt that their own community members would understand their small town needs better than an outsider. The technical name for what Del Mar wanted was called City Incorporation, but the residents referred to it as Home Rule. It meant that Del Mar would decide what was best for its town and elect a council and a mayor to govern. Basically, Del Mar would have to raise their own money and then decide how to spend it on things like roads, schools, libraries, and parks. Now that Del Mar was an incorporated city, it needed an official seal. So in 1960, there was a contest, and the prize was $50. The winner included lots of things which represent Del Mar. A lot of what incorporation means to Del Mar has to do with maintaining its charm. In the 1970s, the emphasis was on slow growth and preserving the environment. Because of the efforts of an active group called the Friends of Del Mar, there will never be high-rise apartment buildings or billboards around town. Many people still feel it is very important to work together for the good of Del Mar. The Powerhouse Community Center is a good example of this. Instead of tearing down the old building, which has gone through many transformations, the residents worked hard to raise money to restore it. Today, it is a beautiful center open to the public. You can see a concert or even get married in there. Del Mar is a special place. It took 150 years to build, and it grew family by family. Today, almost 4,500 people call Del Mar their home. People come to live here for the same reasons the Native Americans and pioneers did. It is one of the most beautiful places in the country. Whether you are enjoying the beach, spending a day at the races, or just relaxing, it is good to know that not only have many people walked the paths before you, but also many people will continue to do so